So I want to welcome everyone. My name is Sanjyot Mehendale, for those who don't know me, but I think everybody here knows me. I'm the chair of the Tang Center for Silk Road Studies, and on its behalf, I would like to welcome you here today for this talk by Professor Frantz Grenet. And a special welcome to our speaker. Great to finally see you in person. 11 years after your last visit to the Berkeley campus under the auspices of the Frantz Berkeley Fund program, and 26 years after your first visit, when we organized our very first Silk Road conference and workshop at UC Berkeley. We tried several times in between to get together or to bring Frantz over, but for many reasons it didn't work out. And then on top of it, the COVID pandemic in particular put a wrench in our plans. As mentioned in earlier introductory remarks, because Frantz has given a few talks on Zoom last year, Frantz has been a great help in my own career, allowing me access to excavations in Uzbekistan, helping me set up collaborations also for later generations of graduate students and faculty, and we plan to continue that collaboration on future projects as well. As for Professor Grenet's academic background, he graduated from the École Normale Supérieure in Paris in 1977 and became deputy director of the French archaeological delegation in Afghanistan until 1981, where he worked at the ancient site of Ay-Khanoum under the directorship of the late Professor Paul Bernard. He returned to Afghanistan several times between 2004 and 2012 to work on several other archaeological projects. From 1981 to 2013, he was a researcher at the Centre National de Recherche Scientifique in Paris, and from 1989 to 2014, director of the French Uzbek Archaeological Mission in Sogdiana, which worked primarily at Samarkand.
Which I am again.
And which he is again, which I did not have in my notes.
There was an interim by Claude. Now,
oh, you're back. Okay. Current director of the French Uzbek Archaeological Mission in Sogdiana and Samarkand. From 1999 to 2014, he held a professorship at the École Pratique des Hautes Études, where he chaired the department Religions of the Ancient Iranian World. In 2013, he was appointed professor at the Collège de France, where he chairs the department History and Cultures of Pre-Islamic Central Asia. He has a very, very long list of publications, including 7 edited or co-edited volumes and some 230 articles that focus on the art and archaeology of Central Asia, on Sogdiana, on Zoroastrianism, among many other topics. In preparation is the volume, maybe it's already published, Early Sogdian Inscriptions and Documents.
going to the press.
Going to the press in collaboration with Nicholas Sims Williams. In a year or so, he'll publish the long-awaited final excavation report on Samarkand.
First volume of it.
First volume of it.
First of many.
And many articles are currently in the works on a wide range of topics. Just today, over a 40-minute lunch, we had a discussion on excavations, museums and nationalism, American and French politics, who's who in Central Asian archaeology today, Sogdians, Hephtalites, really, what didn't we discuss? And that gives you also the range of his interests, very, very broad. So we are very, very happy that you're joining us once again. As a reminder, there'll be a second talk by Professor Grenet tomorrow. That one will take place on campus in 3335 Dwinelle at 5 p.m. That talk is entitled The Elite Cultures of Bactria, Sogdiana and Gandhara under a Quick Succession of Masters. For this first talk, Professor Grenet will be discussing the political situation in Central Asia between the Hunnish invasions and the Muslim conquest. So welcome, Frantz.
Thank you, Sanjyot. Well, I wish to express my warm gratitude to Sanjyot for this invitation. I nearly came in person 2 years ago, but as some of you maybe know, I was catch up in Frankfurt, stopover by a message telling me that I was tested COVID positive. So I hurried back. If not, I would have been put immediately in quarantine in San Francisco. So my talks were delivered on Visio. As Sanjyot told you, we have met a long time ago here in Berkeley. We have been in touch continuously, and I keep a very vivid memory of the month. I spent it in 2001, I think, or two. It was short, but extremely productive. I had very interesting exchanges with students, and at that time I was presenting Sogdian documents, and really that seminar I held here in Berkeley gave me an impetus for several articles. So Berkeley has always been a great stimulus to me. Well, today I am presenting the first of two lectures on this period, 5th, 7th century in Central Asia, which has long been considered as obscure, maybe, troubled, dark ages. And in fact, I hope to persuade you that it was not dark at all. So this lecture will be about the political and also social situation of Central Asia from the Huns to the Western Turks. Well, until the second half of the 4th century, under the Kushano-Sasanian dynasty, Bactria and the neighboring territories had continued to enjoy a relative stability and prosperity in continuity with the previous Kushan Empire. Of course, you all know where are Bactria here and Sogdiana, more to the north. Yeah, really in the middle of everything. Yeah, come back to that. After the Kushano-Sasanians, a quick succession of loosely knit polities, Chionites, Kidarites, Hephtalites, were all branches of the Hun migration ultimately issued from the Altaic regions. A tentative map I drew some years ago, it should have been updated, about the various waves and origins of these so-called Hun invaders of Central Asia, starting from the 4th century. So, probably mainly from the Altaic region, but not only. It ushered a time of disorders at home in Central Asia, and in Iran and northwest India, tribute exacting and military aggressions. These people issued contrasting messages of political legitimacy, sometimes claiming continuity with earlier or neighboring empires, sometimes rejecting it. The brief rule of the Kidarites, yes, no more than 50 years, reunified Bactria, Sogdiana and Gandhara for the first time since the time of the Greeks, a development which eventually affected all spheres of culture. From 560 onwards, the domination of the Western Turkish Empire marked the heyday of transcontinental trade, conventionally known as the Silk Road, from China to Byzantium, as well as the emergence of more and more affluent local courts, some of which continued under Islamic rule. Today, I shall present recent advances and new evidence from numismatics, archaeology, and contemporary documentary sources, helping to obtain a more detailed and safer political and social picture of this complex period. For a full discussion of the written sources, with the exception of coins, I can refer to the collective volume Hunnish People in Central and South Asia, Sources for Their Origin and History, edited by Daniel Balog and published in 1920, to which I have contributed. For coins, we now have the volume Das Antlitz des Fremden, so the outlook, the countenance of the foreigner, coinage of the Huns and Western Turks in Central Asia and India, edited by Michael Alram in Vienna and published in 2016. It contains also a lot of non-numismatic material, and it is very easy to use, although I do not share all his chronological views. Well, the Kidarite and Hephthalite period, brief as it was in the history of Central Asia, has marked the historiography by its bad reputation. Western scholars, for a long time, have tended to treat it as the contemporary Dark Ages of Europe. The more so as Kidarites and Hephtalites sometimes called themselves Huns, and were known as such in Byzantine records. In fact, they probably incorporated elements distantly related with the European Huns, which I tried here to draw the migration of the Western Huns as a branch originally coming also from the Altaic migration of the 4th century. Well, at least we know that Attila was most probably born here, because Attila has took his name from the old Turkish name of the Volga. So he was probably Etil. He was probably born at the time his tribe was crossing the Volga. As for Soviet archaeologists, they have often selected this period to draw the line between the ancient slave-holding and the medieval feudal period, according to the terminology of the Marxist Vulgate. Well, this choice actually appeared to find some support in the supposed initial urban decline and the well-documented multiplication of castles during this period. In the second volume of his masterly book, La vieille route de l'Inde, published in 1947, Alfred Fouché expressed a general consensus of historians using the vocabulary of his time. This is my translation. While their congeners were spreading in the West over the whole of Europe, the Hephthalite Huns took the road to the south, and their hordes trod against the soil of northwest India before penetrating into Punjab and Malwa. There, they brought a novelty, that gift of foretold cruelty which under Genghis Khan and Tamerlane was to remain the characteristic of their race and the guiding principle of their strategy. Indeed, the Hephtalites left a terrible memory to all the populations with which they were confronted. The testimony of Armenians serving in the Sasanian army has been transmitted by Lazar of Farp. Even in time of peace, nobody could look at the Hephtalites, nor even hear their name boldly and without fear. When Peroz started his campaign, his army was marching more like condemned to death than like an army going to the war. In northern India, later Buddhist sources consider this period as definitely initiating the millennia of the decline of the law. Although not much political message issued by the Hephtalites themselves has been transmitted in texts, their iconographical message, expressed by their portraits and coins, show a deliberate rejection of the classical or Sasanian canons, and a choice for a frightening look, accentuated by their artificial cranial deformation provocatively exhibited. Actually confirmed by skulls. These were not. These were not caricatures. It doesn't betray. Especially a lack of respect from the artist. It is the way they wanted to show themselves, and this was a message. We are terrible. As mentioned in the beginning of this lecture, the Hephtalites were not the first Hunnish conquerors in Central Asia. The first inroads are documented in the middle of the 4th century when the Sasanian king Shapur II fought the Chionites, whose name is no other than an archaizing rendering of the name of the Huns. After 1 or 2 generations, the Huns of Bactria and Gandhara created a first state, an imperial structure, the Kidarites, which claimed the political heritage of the Kushans. Well, here they appear as Kushano-Sasanian kings, except they are clean-shaven, which is an ethnic feature of the Altaic people. On a seal from Samarkand, which I published with Nicholas Sims Williams, dating from the 460s, the local Kidarite ruler calls himself King of the Huns, King Orlar Huns, a branch of the Huns, Great King of the Kushans, Afshan of Samarkand. Afshan is the origin of the title Afshin, met later on. The Hephtalites did not take over this claim, and they were the first one who deliberately broke with all previous legitimacies. Where did the Hephtalites come from? Chinese envoys never managed to obtain coherent information. They first appear in 457 on the eastern Piedmonts of Tokarestan, which is ancient Bactria, the new name of Bactria, here in this zone. They appear simultaneously in Chinese records. They were in contact with the Chinese, and in Iranian records because they already interfered in the succession war between 2 Sasanian pretenders. Probably they were in contact with Sasanian provinces through the passes of the Hindu Kush. They were probably established there since the Hunnish migrations of the previous century. Which language did they speak originally? We don't know. Contrary to the Kidarites and the Kushan of Mongolia, for which we have some indications of Altaic languages, we cannot answer this question. And even the name Hephthalite defies etymological attempts. The onomastics of their royal family is either Bactrian or related to the Sarmatian linguistic stratum in the broad sense. So, we say northeastern Iranian, the same family as the Scythian languages. As soon as they emerge as a state, they take over the administrative language of their new dominions. Bactrian, richly documented now by the archives of the Robe Kingdom, and Sanskrit in India. This is their coins minted in Bactria have Bactrian legends. Their coins minted in India have Sanskrit legends in Brahmi, and what was their own language, we don't know. In 467, allied with the Sasanians, who soon regretted it, they captured Balkh and replaced the Kidarites. During a long time, the Chinese envoys continued to meet their supreme rulers in their original realm in the Piedmonts of eastern Tokarestan. And there they were keeping their ancestral way of life. I quote the Chinese Weishu. Without cities and towns, they follow water and grass, using felt to make houses, moving to cool places in summer, to warm ones in winter. So they live in yurts. Their king separates his wives and keep each of them in a separate place so that they are 200 or 300 li apart from one another. A very wise policy. The king travels around and changes places every month. But in the cold of winter, he stays in one place for 3 months without moving. The throne is not always passed on to the elder son. The other sons and younger brothers might also be appointed when the king dies. They have many camels and horses. As for the dead, if he was rich, a chamber made of stones is constructed. If he was poor, a grave is dug and he is buried in the ground. It's confirmed by archaeology. All their belongings are put in the tomb. These people are fierce and violent and make able warriors. The Chinese also noticed that the king received sitting together with his main wife, which had not been the habit of the Sasanians nor apparently of the Kushans. Very soon, they sent their armies in all directions, in broad, maximal extension of the Hephthalite Empire. In the south, they quickly, they soon, well, not really seen here, but that direction, they soon reached Gandhara, which had been already submitted by the Kidarites, and then northwest India, which they raided repeatedly. In the north, they occupied Sogdiana, already acquired by the Kidarites. To the east, they asserted their control over Khotan and Kushan, and they established matrimonial ties with the Proto-Mongolian Confederation of the Kushan. In the west, they defeated the Sasanians, whose king Peroz was killed in battle in 484 with the finest of his nobility. They raided as far as the region of modern Tehran, and for decades they extracted a tribute which drained most of the silver coined in Iran. Again, it has been confirmed archaeologically. Edward Veladze has shown that in the Principality of Chaganian, here north of the Amudarya, almost all the silver coinage used until the Muslim conquest consisted into countermarked Sasanian coins. This was a tribute. They didn't need to issue their own money there. They have the Sasanians minted for them. It is certainly on the basis of this sudden enrichment that we should appreciate the new dynamism of urban foundations and the commission of luxury objects, for which a contribution of hired Byzantine craftsmen can sometimes be suspected, a question which will be addressed in the next lecture. This huge empire was ruled by a family condominium, with the Yabgu supreme ruler established in Tokarestan, several Tegin sub-rulers on the Indian front, and everywhere local dynasties maintained but submitted to heavy fiscal pressure, as witnessed by the Bactrian archives of the Kingdom of Robe in the Hindu Kush. A particular institution was the Chakar, military retainers attached to their master by a kind of adoption. Their devotion went so far as sacrificing their life in battle or by suicide after the death of the master, at least if we can believe the statement by the Byzantine chronicler Procopius, who sometimes exaggerates. This policy of establishing a network of personal bonds used also other means. A silver bowl from Swat, we are going to examine tomorrow, celebrates a deliberate policy of fusion of the aristocracies. One of the four rulers is actually a Hephthalite. I'll come back to it tomorrow. In the palace of Kafir Kala, near Samarkand, it was actually the outside residence of the Samarkand rulers, a wooden door excavated 6 years ago, as Alisher knows well, with carved reliefs, shows the members of the city council worshipping the goddess Nana. Some of these worshippers have on their shoulders the ribbons mentioned by the Chinese as a distinctive badge of Hephthalite aristocrats, and shown actually on some of their coins, an indication that they infiltrated the local political institutions. According to the Chinese, they could mobilize up to 100,000 men, mostly archers. Now, a very well-documented reconstruction by Valery Nikonorov. They also, in their army, they also used heavy cavalry from the submitted countries. In 484, as I mentioned before, they crushed the Sasanian army by using a hunting tactic typical of the steppe, a simulated flight and a masked ditch blocking a valley. And this technique calls to mind the long gazelle traps known in the Ushered plateau, west of the Aral Sea. They simply used their hunting techniques to fight the Sasanian army, and it worked. In their final period, they also had garrisons stationed in town, as mentioned by Maniach, the Sogdian envoy to Byzantium, and it's confirmed archaeologically at Penjikent, where barracks were inserted inside a disused city wall. Contrary to Chinese witnesses from the early Hephthalite period, witnesses from the end insist on a trend towards sedentarization. Its king has his capital in the walled city of Badian, which probably means the walled city in which the king resides. This walled city is more than 10 li square, so it means 5 kilometers. There are many monasteries and stupas, all decorated with gold. The town of Badian here, mentioned here, is most probably Balkh. After an initial decline of urban life, moreover not generally attested, the Kidarite and Hephthalite period are indeed marked by the foundation of new cities or by extensions from pre-existing fortresses. The best studied examples are, of course, Penjikent, well, in the pre-existing fortress here, and already under the Kidarite period, probably the Kidarite period, early 5th century, the first city, lower city here. There are also 3 now well-known examples in the Bukhara oasis, Paikent, Rabinjan, and Vardana, probably also the first fortified town of Bukhara. All these cities share several features: an orthogonal organization of the streets, a modest size, overall 10 to 15 hectares initially, and it was actually better fitted for duration than the oversized towns inherited from the Greeks and Kushans, like Balkh, Merv, which were never completely populated and shrunk at that time. In northern Turkestan, cities from the earlier periods were refortified and reorganized. These towns, this network of towns, will continue to structurate the urban network far beyond the Islamic conquest. This is really the beginning of the Islamic urbanization of Central Asia. In cities as well as in the countryside, a uniform type of aristocratic mansions, sometimes fortified, spread from Chach, modern Tashkent, to the Bamiyan region. And you see, this is not amateur building. They had architects. They had catalogs of plans submitted to the local aristocrats. This homogeneity suggests the geographic mobility of the aristocratic classes, as well as the mobility of the architects and decorators. here a castle in Ustrushana with the typical architectural way of covering vaults covering the rooms, etc. Squinches, and these were emitted in castles. Well, not emitted actually, it is not stone imitation, it is actually mud brick near Bamiyan. And you can see it's exactly the same style. All care was reserved to the reception halls with brick sofas all around and ceilings in carved wood. They were the settings for banquets accompanied with music, which are illustrated by the painted decoration in many places, mainly in Penji Kent. This composite aristocratic milieu and its refined social uses will in some places survive until the Umayyad period, before the elimination of the former ruling class under the early Abbasids. Under the Kidarites and even more under the Hephtalites, Central Asia experienced an international opening it has not known since Alexander's successors. Links with India were manifold, manifested not only by the prosperity of Buddhism, but also by the influx of Hindu models in the Zoroastrian iconography. This is a typically syncretic god, Wahram, the Zoroastrian god of war, and who took many features of the Indian Kartikeya, a warlike deity from the Shivaite circle. See, eventually you cannot, at the end, you have some things from Vahram, the wings, the hawk in his crown, which is actually described in the Avesta, but at the same time, a peacock, which comes from Kartikeya. It becomes completely fused in a syncretic deity which could be called as well Wahram or Kartikeya. Recent regular contacts with the Chinese court were resumed in 437 after a long interruption due to the simultaneous collapse of the Eastern Han's and Kushan dynasties after 230. In the 5th century, the aristocracy of the Northern Way liked to surround itself with precious wealth imported from Central Asia and to put them in their graves. A spectacular example has recently been found at Datong, the capital of the Northern Way. A gold leaf stamping of a plate which was most probably executed in Gandhara after a Roman model and showed the drunkenness competition of Heracles and Dionysus standing on a chariot drawn by a satyr. Here is Heracles with his club. Here is Dionysus with his cup. And I don't remember who will eventually fall from the chariot first, but this was the... well, it obviously had a meaning for the people who used it, because it was most prestigious. Actually, you can't drink in such a stamped golden foil. It was just for display. And the fact it is in gold, makes me think it was a diplomatic present from some Hephthalite court to the Chinese way. This is also, as well known, the moment when Sogdian trade with China, developed since the 2nd century AD, reached a new stage. In the end of the 6th century, shortly after the Hephtalites had given way to the Western Turks, leaders of Sogdian communities established in northern China illustrated their life on reliefs decorating their funerary monuments. One of them, Wilkak, dead in 579 in Xi'an, commissioned images of his young days, when he was traveling with caravans on the roads. Here he is, with his, probably his father or grandfather, and he's traveled, it was before he became a high dignitary in the local Chinese administration. As he died very old, this early part of his life coincided not with the contemporary Turkish Empire, but with the Hephtalites and their Eastern allies. Although the settings are stereotyped and do not enable to identify precisely the kingdoms, it is clear that his travels took place in a continuous chain of sedentary of nomadic rulers, shown either hunting or taking audience with their wife, as previously mentioned, as described by Chinese accounts. And some of them, like the Hephtalites on some coins, imitate the winged crown of the defeated Sasanian king Peroz. This is really the Hephthalite and peri-Hephthalite world in which Virkak lived in the first part of his life. I would very much like to interpret these three ladies from a mention in Chinese records, according to which the king of the Hephtalites gave his three sisters to the ruler of the confederation, the Mongolian confederation of the Ruran, to the northeast, in which case Virkak might have been, might have worked as an intermediary. But, well, I've never put that in writing, but I would like it to be true. Religious sphere, the archaeological evidence from Bactria and Gandhara invites not to overestimate the impact of the persecution of Buddhism attributed to Mihirakula. Well, even if obviously Mihirakula preferred to display Shivaite symbols on his coins. Rather, you see here the trident. Here, it's not really the Sasanian fire altar because it has a head here. It's something syncretic. Shivaites, Iranians, something like that. It is at the time of the Hephtalites that, for the first time, we hear about Christian bishops in Central Asia. Jews were numerous and influent. Significantly, Byzantine historians called the Hephtalites not Hephthalitai, but Nephtalitai, one of the lost tribes of Israel, suggesting that they lived together in the same country. In the 8th century, we have, or possibly earlier, we have graffiti in square Hebrew on the rocks of the Upper Indus. In the same spots are earlier graffiti by Sogdian traders. This Jewish presence in the Hephthalite Empire certainly explains the density of Jewish settlements documented during the early Islamic period in their former territory. See, Merv, Samarkand, Balkh, Herat, Bamiyan, a lot in Bamiyan and Firuzko with the Jewish cemetery. Bamiyan now, the new discovery of the so-called Bamiyan Afghan Geniza, a very rich archive from the 11th century. It's all former Hephthalite territories. So I'm sure they were already here under the Hephtalites. I shall return to this theme more in detail tomorrow about a particular silver vessel. For those who won't come tomorrow, I mentioned that these are two episodes from the Alexander romance. Alexander reaching the fountain of life, and Alexander picking up frankincense in an Indian temple. Yes, but Alexander is circumcised. This is the Jewish version of the Alexander romance, the only version where Alexander actually manages to reach the Garden of Eden because he is considered by the Jews as a just, who has recognized the superiority of the God of Israel. This was produced in Bactria for a rich community of Jews living there. some orientations changed with the sudden coming to power of the Turkish Empire in 560. The Hephtalites had anticipated the menace, as suggested by the completion, probably at their time, of the long wall protecting the whole northern border of Sogdiana, actually as far as Fergana. There was also a wall around the oasis of Bukhara, the Kampirdi wall. And this wall is now being restudied in the Bukhara section by Søren Stark. Contrary to the Kidarites and Hephtalites, who immediately crossed the Hindu-Kush barrier to India, a substantial presence of Turkish tribes and rulers is not attested south of the Hindu-Kush before 1 century after they came to power in Bactria and Sogdiana. In the time interval, the links were less strong than before with Gandhara and India, and actually Xuanzang perceived the Buddhist pilgrim Xuanzang, who traveled there about 630, perceived Gandhara and India as politically completely separated from the countries he has crossed before. The orientation then was more to the northern steppes and beyond them towards Byzantium by the northern road, north of the Aral Sea and Caspian. Actually, an alliance was concluded between the Turks and Byzantium in order to bypass the Sasanian Empire, but it was not actually for a long time. Well, to conclude that part of my talk, altogether, the 2 centuries of the Kidarite and Hephthalite domination have changed the face of Central Asia forever, be it for urbanism, arts, transcontinental trade, or religious diversity. A few centuries after the collapse of the 2 great empires of antiquity, Rome and Han China, these must-fear barbarians had brought Central Asia into medieval modernity. And now, as an appendix to this lecture, I would like to share some very preliminary and recent thoughts I had about another contribution of the Hephthalite to global history, although not a positive one. I have in mind their possible role in the start of the so-called Plague of Justinian, which swept the whole of the Mediterranean world in 541-542, with replicas until 750, and which, according to some estimates, might have killed as much as the Black Death 6 centuries later. The bibliography on this first pandemic has grown since 2014, when David Wagner and his team have demonstrated from DNA samples that the agent of this plague was already Yersinia pestis, the very same bacillus responsible for the Black Death. And in both cases, the epidemic most probably started from a mutation of the bacillus in its dormant reservoir among rodents in the plains and deserts south of the Altai and northern Xinjiang. This is just a small selection of publications which each mark a new stage of research. Well, until very recently, this epidemic was mechanically assumed to have taken the same transcontinental route as later on the Black Death, an assumption which was not backed by any textual nor DNA-based argument. Some facts are indeed puzzling. While for the Black Death, the obvious prime suspect is the Mongol Empire and its great movement of armies and traders, the factor now postulated for its 6th century predecessor is the Silk Road and its camel transportation. Well, but camel transportation was far from generalized on long distances to the west. Well, Sasanian Iran was indeed affected by plague, but rather in the 7th century, at which time it is attested by some written sources, and seemingly confirmed by the obvious military weakness of Iran confronted with the Arab invasion. For the 6th century, under the heyday of Khosrow and Anushirvan, there is no such indication whatsoever. On the contrary, at that time, the Sasanians were able to mobilize huge armies simultaneously on all fronts: Byzantium, India, Arabia. As you can see from this map by Keller, even in Mesopotamia, all recorded dates are from the 7th or 8th century, with the exception of one, and which is not right in the beginning, is 561. Nicolas Schindel, the numismatist Nicolas Schindel, concluded his recent article, The Justinian Plague and Sasanian Iran, the Numismatic Evidence, with these words: in the case of Emperor Justinian, coins would bear witness to the severe effects of the plague. In that of Khosrow I, they do not attest a decline in monetary production that could be linked to the pandemic of 141 AD. In fact, the very last contributions by Dominique Moreau and Gilles Brandsburg insist on the fact that the very first places where the plague of Justinian is documented in July 541 were the ports of Clysma in the northern end of the Red Sea and Pelusium just north of it. Places more linked with transcontinental networks on Earth, like Alexandria and the Syro-Palestinian coast, appear slightly later on. Consequently, after some hesitation, both authors now incline towards an initial maritime road from the harbors of Western India. But they admit they are short of a model to link this zone with the historical reservoir of Yersinia pestis.